Should I do my intro while we?
Oh my
we're
goodness.
Still on? Okay.
Yes, please.
Good. All right. So for those who don't know me, I'm Brad. I'm the Dean of Theology and Culture, and I'm a professor of religious studies at SSU. And Jessica has been working through her Master of Arts, and I also got to be her first reader. So now here's my introduction to her. Those who know Jessica Williams have no doubt experienced her as a deeply sincere confidant, an empathetic poet, a runner of troubling distances, and so much more. And we, her instructors, also know her as a very thoughtful, creative, and diligent student. Today I introduce Jessica as a bona fide mystical theologian in the tradition of Saint Makrina the Younger, who you'll hear about, and Saint Teresa de Lisieux, who she studied as well. And what makes her thesis a unique treasury of poetry and theology is Jess's relentless pursuit of the transformation she writes about. She feels a nagging discomfort writing about anything she isn't living fully. But given that her topic entails more than a lifetime of personal growth, we're both grateful for her grace in the meantime. Pondered seriously, I believe her presentation will be a taste of grace for all of us. So over to you, Jessica.
Thank you. I'm just thinking, I'm going to turn this so you can see. Okay, so I'm beginning now. You all must know that having Brad Jersak as my thesis supervisor for an MA in Theology and Culture has been a bit of a dream, except that it has also felt very normal, very human. If you know Brad, you know that he doesn't give you a lot of time to imagine you're dreaming. He keeps things moving, and I have needed this. About a year and a half ago, Brad and I sat down at the cafe and worked on my outline. I brought it today as a prop because it's full of Brad's pencil marks all over it. And during this conversation, he listened to my heart and to where I wanted to go, and he made sure that my map would get me there. And throughout the next year, I have studied those pencil notes relentlessly, and have been so grateful for them. So at the very bottom of this, he wrote this, my first slide. So you can't see the slides, but he wrote the words, to start, ask, show me the heart of the matter, and to end, consider, don't weary yourself versus just pressing through. So the truth is, I didn't always listen to this sage advice, but I did remember it, and I looked at those words often. In writing those words, Brad modeled a way of engaging academic work that centers the human heart. And he has throughout his supervision of this thesis, which has been all about the heart for me. I'm really grateful for an academic institution that values this. So thank you to Brad and to Peter and Lorna and Walter for making sure that my heart is allowed to be here in all its fullness, and understanding that what's happening in the heart is more important than what's happening on the page. So, the next slide. Hannah's doing my slides. Thank you. So, my thesis is titled On the Soul. Nope, that's St. Makrina. My thesis is titled Kenotic Love and the Soul's Transformation. This title is precise, but it's difficult to understand if you aren't familiar with the topic. So that's my job today. I hope I can simply whet your appetite and give you a glimpse of what this work has meant to me. I'm going to start by reading my abstract to be concise about what it is I've attempted to do. So, the intent of my thesis has been to illumine an understanding of kenotic love and how our encounter with this love leads to personal transformation, resulting in a relationship of authentic, self-giving love with God, oneself, and others. That claim is demonstrated first through examining the theologies of kenosis and theosis, words I will define, followed by a critical analysis of the life and teachings of Saint Makrina the Younger, who is a 4th century Cappadocian theologian, church mother, and saint. Our comprehension of these topics builds upon the thoughts and theology of the early church mothers and fathers as they explored and developed a doctrine of divinization or theosis, a concept that signaled a return to the telos of humanity, a humanity that was believed to be made in the image and likeness of God. Finally, these findings are applied to the intersection of encounter and incarnational faith. So, speaking of the heart, my own heart has been the driving force behind this work. Oftentimes, it has felt like I am chasing after what I need to know most deeply. This is good, but it's difficult because I couldn't go faster than my heart would go. So the next slide. I really like this one. This slide gives a full visual of the thesis and offers a metaphor for how these topics came together for me. Essentially, there are 2 parts. Chapter 1, the introduction, is the base. It quickly outlines the whole. And I put the chapter dedicated to Saint Makrina at the peak because her thoughts and theology flow through the whole thing. The first part, chapters 2 to 4, focuses on examining the early Christian understandings of kenosis and theosis and then how they interact. This was the heavy lifting for me. It was an uphill battle. I had to dig deep into early theological debates that I wouldn't naturally be inclined toward, but I knew I needed them to get to where I wanted to go. Once I got through those chapters and moved into the life of Saint Makrina, everything started to flow, which is why I give this downhill visual for the second half. Chapters 6, 7, and 8 are my heart on the page. The application, the intersection of encounter and incarnational faith explores what it means to encounter love, to discover our home in love, and to become that love. It is the journey of recognizing that we are love itself, and that we embody God, that we embody love by being ourselves. That is what incarnation means to me, or I think possibly Joel explained it yesterday as the conditions for emergence, but I might not have made that connection as it's meant to be made. Chapter 7 is also important because it highlights feminist theology, and it identifies not just problematic language, but how that language has been used to oppress, control, and manipulate women throughout church history. These are deep wounds within our society that have not been overcome. I actually couldn't get through my chapter on kenosis, chapter 2, without beginning this part of the thesis. It became very important for me to identify what I mean and what I don't mean by kenotic love. And honestly, I was dreading chapter 8 because I really don't like writing conclusions, but in the end, I think it might be my favorite chapter. So. All right, I'm going to start with Saint Makrina. Like I said, she is the peak. I was directed to Saint Makrina because I had Brad as a professor, but also because I couldn't get my universalist heart to be quiet, no matter how hard I tried. I think I tried to quiet my heart for all kinds of reasons, but a big one is because I'm an Enneagram 6, and my core need is belonging. This is also probably why universalism means so much to me. Everyone must belong. But my heart for a universal worldview on salvation or religion jeopardized my belonging in every church I had gone to, mostly Western evangelical Christianity. It was a bridge too far. Even still, I couldn't let it go. So I just kept asking questions, and eventually I was given Saint Makrina. Saint Makrina, this 4th century Cappadocian genius, beautifully and brilliantly insists that humanity is made in the image of God and will return to God. Another way she says that is like this, which is slide 4. What we hope for is nothing other than what was at first. One of the most helpful things for me in her work is the language she uses to define the word God. It's helpful for me because the word or name is problematic. Frankly, it's been plundered by the patriarchy, often evoking pictures of an old white man on a throne in the sky, and I don't like it. Makrina calls God, quote, the good and the beautiful. Makrina calls God limitless love. And she asserts again and again that the true essence of the soul is love. Therefore, the soul is attracted to love, to the good and the beautiful. The soul is attracted to what it is. Slide 5. So this is some icons of Saint Makrina that I love. Saint Makrina comes from an affluent Cappadocian family. She's the eldest of 9 children, and she helps her mother raise them after her father's death. Her brothers become famous, known in the history books as the Cappadocian Fathers, and honored for their contributions to the development of the understanding of the Trinity and the hypostasis, or the hypostatic union, finalized in the final version of the Nicene Creed in 381. She has 4 brothers who become saints, and both of her parents are as well. Now, they are all very smart. They're educated in philosophy and rhetoric, but also deeply devout Christians in the 4th century. They are believed to be primarily educated at home, which may be how Makrina comes to be equally educated herself, although she doesn't seem to be given the opportunity to write. So we rely upon the writings of her brothers to tell us her story. When we hear about or see the trio of Cappadocian fathers, we are seeing 2 of Makrina's brothers and a close friend. The 2 brothers being St. Basil and St. Gregory of Nyssa, and the close friend is St. Gregory of Nazianzus. It was well known that the Cappadocian fathers viewed Makrina as an equal, and for this reason, many believe she should be called the 4th Cappadocian. I would like to suggest that they speak of her as their superior, calling her the elder and the teacher. When I read on the soul and the resurrection, it becomes clear that, much like Mary Magdalene is an apostle to the apostles but not recognized as such, so too Saint Makrina is a theologian to the theologians. The written accounts show us this, as do the icons in which Makrina stands shoulder to shoulder with the men who are holding their books, but she holds the scroll. Or, in this depiction, the next slide, in this depiction, she is literally holding the icon of the 3 fathers. She holds them, they do not hold her. Okay, so I'm going to read a little bit from my thesis now. I'm going to do this quite a lot moving forward. And I had many friends say that what they were hoping for today was just to listen to me read, so that's basically what I'm doing. Okay, so I'm going to read from the beginning of my chapter on Saint Makrina, just to draw the connection so you see what it was in my life that drew me toward her. Okay. For as long as I can remember, I've been deeply troubled by the doctrine of hell. I imagine most of us are. I grew up in a church context that taught there was both a literal heaven, a place in the sky with streets of gold and gates of pearl, and a literal hell, a place beneath us where many would go to be punished in a lake of fire for all eternity. In my tradition, one might lose their salvation, their entrance into heaven, their golden ticket, so to speak, on any given day. I recommitted my little heart to Jesus over and over and over again. My after-church conversations with friends turned over the possibilities that lay before us all. What if I sin and then we get into a car accident and I haven't repented yet? Will I go to heaven or hell? One could never really know. While I eventually grew out of these worries in particular, the fear simply manifested itself in other ways, or rather, it went underground, permeating much of my life. The quest to be good enough for God was unending, and grace was a mystery I'd barely glimpsed. Should I encounter it, my deeply internalized shame for needing it at all overshadowed any relief to be had. Never did the depth of my insecurity on the subject rise to the surface with such intensity as it did when I was being put under anesthesia to have an emergency surgery for an ectopic pregnancy that had ruptured. As I lay on the operating table counting down from 100, I found myself gripped with that familiar childhood fear. Will I go to heaven? At this point in my life, it wasn't that I feared a lake of fire so much as I feared eternal separation from God, who I knew as the source of all love in my life. I wanted to be with God. Panicking, I prayed this prayer, please, God, please let me go to heaven. Deeply convinced I was not good enough, I prayed on, I'm sorry, please, I'm so sorry. In that moment and in the days that followed, I recognized that a somewhat forgotten fear residing deep within me had been revealed, and perhaps for the first time, I felt deeply compassionate toward myself. I saw through the veneer and understood that at my most vulnerable moment, I was deeply unsure of love and belonging. When facing death, my religious upbringing had formed me in such a way that I was bracing myself for rejection. Just a year later, I would allow the faith of my childhood to crumble. I believe it was becoming a mother that cracked that foundation. The idea that a loving God would send billions of his so-called children to burn in eternal torment just would not hold up any longer. My heart was too big for that. I looked at the world around me and knew that there must be a greater love, so I let most of the building blocks evangelical Christianity had given me fall away. This was terrifying, to say the least, but in the end, what I was left with was this. I believe in God. God is love. Be love. These touchstones served me well. I was deep in the land of mothering my 3 children now, and early motherhood for me was a minefield of grief unto itself. I needed something to hold on to. Love it was. What I remember bringing to God through that time was my grief and my questions. This was all I had. I felt like my faith was fragile and failing. I had so little of it left. But these days I look back and see a faith that was active and strong. Shame has been replaced by pride, and now I imagine that God delighted in this precise version of me. Eventually, it would be that very grief and the deepest questions in my heart that led me to the feet of Saint Makrina. I was in good company. Saint Gregory, Bishop of Nyssa, knelt beside me there, taking the lead. Saint Gregory's questions are different than mine, but as soon as I began to read his book titled On the Soul and the Resurrection, my soul felt relief. So often, biblical texts and theology books come at us as if they are factual, truths to be understood, not questioned. This way of learning theology had never worked for me. I needed a space to object. I needed a God I could confront. In some ways, I needed to throw my stones at love and encounter a love that could withstand it, that could withstand me. Saint Gregory, in his own way, had done the same. He came to his older sister, whose own health was failing, just after the death of their brother, Saint Basil, and he laid his questions bare. Saint Makrina gathers them up. She gathers him up and reveals a love that can receive all the grief and all the questions within him, a love that can endure. Okay. So we're going to leave Saint Makrina for a little while and come back to her and go to slide 6. So the word kenosis means emptying or to empty. And in the Bible, we find it used in Philippians 2:7, which says, "But Christ emptied himself, becoming human." The key biblical text for this concept is taken from the Christ hymn of Philippians 2. Cyril of Alexandria writes at length on what he calls the emptying, with a capital T, a capital E, the emptying. He offers the early church a foundation for understanding the hypostasis, or the hypostatic union, a theological term meaning that in Christ the one person subsists in two natures, the divine and the human. This was important work as it concluded that Jesus became human without the loss of deity. The most compelling question for me when engaging this concept is this: if the essence of God and the nature of love is revealed through the emptying, then what was emptied or taken off in the incarnation? When we look at Philippians 2, we will find that God rids God's self of privilege. The incarnation can be seen as a demonstration of divine solidarity with humankind. The emptying was not of deity, but of privilege, and the exploitation of privilege for self-gain. Here, it's important to remember that the nature of God was not changed in the incarnation, it was revealed. Therefore, Jesus is a revelation not just of who God is, but of what God isn't. So could it be that the great emptying that occurred in the incarnation is the act of God stripping off all our false assumptions and projections of who and what God is? The world thought God was a mighty king, too holy for humanity, and then God appears in the womb of an unwed woman from Nazareth and calls her chosen and blessed to be the mother of God. Okay, and then we have Theosis, which is defined as likeness to or union with God in the process of attaining this state, or to be made divine. Perhaps the most provoking assertion St. Athanasius makes in his work on the incarnation is this, quote, "For the Son of God became man in order that we might become God," end quote. But at this point, it is critical to remember that when we speak of becoming like God, we are speaking of the image of God revealed in Jesus. There are many images of God humans have projected over time, and many are not the image we see in Christ. Michael Gorman writes, "If the crucified Christ is the image and glory of God, what does that say about God? And what does that say about the process of becoming godlike?" Returning to St. Makrina, we watch her model this path in practical, embodied work, much like Jesus does. Eventually, she convinces her mother to convert the family home into a monastery in which all rank is eliminated and equality embraced. Makrina and her mother, St. Amelia, put themselves on equal footing with the servants in their home, quote, "sharing one table, bed, and all needs of life with every difference of rank eliminated from their lives," end quote. This is a soaring example of an incarnational model of kenotic love. And then we look at the interaction of kenosis and theosis together. So I use a lot of alliteration here to describe the connection between kenosis and theosis, calling it a partnership, a pattern, a parabola, and a path. You could also add in paradox. I'm not going to spend a lot of time here, but I will note that for the Cappadocians, kenosis and theosis are intrinsically connected. Today, some might understand this in terms of the upside-down kingdom. Down is up, less is more. The first will be last, the last will be first. We empty out, and that's how we find the fullness within. The other connection I want to make is that just as God took off the false God in the incarnation, we too must take off the false God in us, or the false self, the ego. This is how the true self emerges from within. This is how theosis occurs. We become like God by becoming ourselves. Okay, next slide. This you cannot see very well, but it's a picture of me at my freest, I think, on a canoe trip with good friends. And this quote by Merton is one that I love. It is not only human nature that is saved by the divine mercy, but above all the human person. The object of salvation is that which is unique, irreplaceable, incommunicable, that which is myself alone. This true inner self must be drawn up like a jewel from the bottom of the sea. So like I said, I did that work in the beginning so that I would be able to say what I say in chapters 6 through 8. My application engages the intersection of encounter and incarnational faith, emphasizing the connection between surrender and the salvation of the true self. My thesis is that it is through our encounter with love that we become love, or it is through our encounter with love that we become who we really are. Again, Thomas Merton gives voice to this beautifully, and I'm going to read what might be my favorite quote by him and my thoughts that follow. I really like flipping through these pages. Okay. Thomas Merton writes, "Many poets are not poets for the same reason that many religious men are not saints." Okay. Thomas Merton always says men. And he just does, I think, because he's a monk and he's writing to the brothers, so I try to forgive him. Okay. Many poets are not poets for the same reason that many religious men are not saints. They never succeed at being themselves. They never get around to being the particular poet or the particular monk they are intended to be by God. They never become the man or the artist who is called for by all the circumstances of their individual lives. They waste their years in vain efforts to be some other poet, some other saint. For many absurd reasons, they are convinced that they are obliged to become somebody else who died 200 years ago and who lived in circumstances utterly alien to their own. In great saints, you find that perfect humility and perfect integrity coincide. The two turn out to be practically the same thing. Humility consists in being precisely the person you actually are before God. And since no two people are alike, if you have the humility to be yourself, you will not be like anyone else in the whole universe. I believe that this is the heart of the matter. We are the image of God God wants to see. Every human life is a new expression of love, a one-of-a-kind reflection of the divine. When we humbly surrender to this love within us, we find that the soul begins to rise. We are lifted up. We are transfigured. We come alive. If the nature of love is to give itself, then to give our true self to the world is the most God-like thing we can do. For this reason, I think it is critical to understand that self-giving love is not self-deprivation. In fact, these are two opposing forces. To deny myself is to oppress myself, and if I oppress myself, I cannot give myself to God or to anybody else. This is one reason why I believe it is a tragedy that the church has marginalized and rejected the beloved 2S LGBTQIA+ community. When we insist that someone is not their true self, when we enforce doctrine and policies that take away one's right to exist as they are, we are not just rejecting them, which is bad enough. We are also rejecting the image of God they are meant to be. We are rejecting Christ. Merton writes, quote, "If Christ became man, it is because he wanted to be any man and every man. If we believe in the incarnation of the Son, there should be no one on earth in whom we are not prepared to see in mystery the presence of Christ." End quote. So it's one thing to imagine God giving God's self to the world, but how do we come to participate with God in this way? I think this is the great invitation of our lives. Allegorically speaking, we are all Mary. An angel arrives to all of us, announcing us chosen and favored to carry Christ, to carry love. This love is not just for ourselves, but like an embryo, it ignites and multiplies, it grows, taking on a shape that expands us beyond the borders our body knew before. This occurs through a holy fusion, a hypostatic union with our life with the life of God. The love that is birthed through us could not exist without us. For some of us, accepting this annunciation is the hardest part. Okay, I'm gonna stop there. So slide 8, you can go to slide 8. I love this image of Margot Humphrey's title, and it's titled The Black Madonna, 2012. And I've put it up there with a quote by St. Makrina that I repeat many times throughout the thesis. There is no limit to the operation of love, since the beautiful has no limit, so that love might cease with the limit of the beautiful. And I'd like to invite you to look at this icon, this modern icon, and to consider it in the context I'm about to explore by reading excerpts from my critical analysis and summary of findings. So I'll be looking at feminism and then like my final words on application. I think I'm missing something here. Oh yeah, when it comes to feminism and kenosis, it was really important to me to name the downfalls of kenotic theology and how it's been used against women over time. So I'm just going to read a few of my favorite insights on that, and then I'll close with a piece of my conclusion. Yeah. Oh no, I need this. So, all right. So feminism and kenosis. When I decided to write a thesis on kenotic love, there was something deeply unsettling about it for me at the start. Pretty much every word used to describe kenosis and kenotic theology engages triggering language for women. Kenotic love is defined as self-giving, self-emptying, co-suffering, sacrificial love. Need I say more? While I've worked to define these words through a lens of liberation and feminist theology, I have not explicitly named the potential problems the words bring with them. That is what I will do now. And to begin, I would seek to untangle the words self-giving and selflessness. This is an important distinction for women, especially within Christianity, where they have not only faced the social constraints of a patriarchal society, but have also been spiritually manipulated to believe they must sacrifice themselves for their homes, their families, and their communities as a required form of devotion to God. In her book, Sexism and God Talk, Rosemary Radford Ruther describes this complication, particularly among women from conservative Christian traditions, writing, "One of the most difficult barriers to feminist consciousness is the identification of sin with anger and pride and virtue with humility and self-abnegation. Although this doctrine of sin and virtue supposedly is for all Christians, it becomes for women an ideology that reinforces female subjugation and lack of self-esteem. Women become Christ-like by having no self of their own. They become the suffering servants by accepting male abuse and exploitation. Women are made to feel profoundly guilty and diffident about even the smallest self-affirmation. They fear the beginning steps of asking who they are and what they want to do, rather than putting others first." So, in my mind, self-giving love begins with what Ruther calls rebirth to authentic selfhood. And it flies in the face of this form of piety that teaches us to perform or pretend in order to please and appease people in power. A woman with the audacity to be her authentic self and to give herself upsets the system of hierarchy, just as Christ did. Self-giving love is seen in one who turns away from the world's expectations of what they are supposed to be and consents to the creation of who they are. In this context, self-giving love is not to deny the self, but to discover and gift it, rather than clinging to the costume, the false image, while suppressing and oppressing the true image within. Thomas Merton explains that a tree gives glory to God by being a tree. The more a tree is like itself, the more it is like God. If we follow this thought, it should lead us to say that a woman gives glory to God by being a woman, and that two-spirited, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer people give glory to God by being two-spirited, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer. The more each of us becomes like ourselves, the more we become like God. One reason I love the Cappadocian Fathers as much as I do is because they confronted the sin of patriarchy in their time, actively speaking out against unjust legislation and advocating for the equality of women as a tenet of the Christian faith. I'm supposed to skip that part. Sorry. So moving on. But understanding the societal oppression of women gives perspective for the Cappadocians' glorification of virginity as the Christian ideal. This is a topic I have intentionally avoided up until now because, well, it is cringeworthy. We find it repeated over and over in reference to Makrina. She is referred to as the perfect virgin bride. But Sundberg offers an explanation that certainly helps, writing, "Virginity brought freedom to women, not only freedom from the cycle of death, but also from the misfortunes of marriage, which were many." Nyssen became passionate as he discussed the problems in marriage and suggested that a young woman should go to the law court and, quote, read the marriage laws. For there she will discover the abomination of marriage. Albrecht notes that the marriage of late antiquity was meaningless. The hope for most women was escape from the world. Female ascetics, then, were emancipated precisely by their asceticism, that is, by the withdrawal of their bodies from the roles usually imposed on them by society. So a woman asserting autonomy over her own body amidst a society that withholds her rights and fails to regard her as fully human is powerful. It is easy to read of these women now and overlook the strong strides toward equality and liberation they made, masked as it is in the language of religious devotion. I have come to not only marvel at their strength, but gain an inner sense of feminine fortitude by the courage they displayed through the bold withdrawal of their bodies from the use of the world, or men, declaring themselves married to Christ and in need of no other authority. The truth is, while society has made steps toward equality throughout the centuries, the undercurrents of patriarchy are strong. Laws that protect women are good, but they do not absolve us of the core beliefs that created these conditions in the first place. A humble awareness of these oppressive realities for women must be maintained when we use words like self-giving, self-emptying, sacrificial, and co-suffering. It is treacherously easy to interpret these words in a way that suggests that we eliminate boundaries, that we are self-effacing. Sadly, the Church has perpetrated upon the devotion of its women through a patriarchal institution that has failed to fully renounce and eradicate the systemic oppression within it. While there's always been streams of liberation flowing down through the ages of church history, the popularized view in the institutionalized church across every major tradition, Catholic, Protestant, Orthodox, has maintained a view toward women that explicitly places them below men in terms of authority and equality, thus denying and degrading the good image within them. Again, Ruther rightly points out that, quote, the more one becomes a feminist, the more difficult it becomes to go to church, end quote. I know many of us identify with this experience today. So at this point, you might ask, why keep looking to Christianity? So I'll try to answer that. When I place my gaze on Christ, I begin to understand that evil cannot be overcome by evil, but it will be overcome by good. So for Jesus feminists today, it is imperative to recognize that we cannot fight oppression with oppression, hate with hate, dominance with dominance. But this does not mean that we do nothing. Jesus certainly is not passive in his protest of the religious system of his time. This is well seen in this image. He actively identifies himself with the disenfranchised and aggravates the powers that be through what many social activists today call nonviolent direct action. And I ask you, could God be more direct than by descending into the womb of an unwed woman from Nazareth and declaring her chosen and blessed to carry the Christ, the long-awaited Messiah, God in flesh? Feminism and social activism, at its best, confronts injustice by infusing love into the wounded wombs of the world, into the people and places that have been hated, exploited, and oppressed. As Martin Luther King Jr. so eloquently expressed it, returning violence for violence multiplies violence, adding deeper darkness to a night already devoid of stars. Darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that. Are you still with me? I'm almost done. So finally, I'm going to end with just a small piece from my conclusion, and then that will be it. Okay, so in today's world, what would all of this mean? What would kenotic cruciform love embodied through us look like? Historically speaking, and in my own experience, the church hasn't always done such a great job of revealing God in this way. Time and time again, we have seen Christianity cower and cooperate with damaging power systems and or create their own. And too often, we believe there's nothing we can do to change it, so we sit, comfortably or uncomfortably, and become complicit with structures that oppress the other but benefit us. In his book, Making America Great Again, David Moore writes, many of us see Christianity as the entity that, at best, stood in silence while Africans were purchased, sold, raped, brutalized, and humiliated in other ways, and at worst, provided religious justification. So this is horrible, and it is true. It does not serve anyone to ignore it. In fact, the current cultural landscape is loud. Many groups that have been systemically marginalized are crying out for allies and rallying for long-awaited justice. Power struggles between opposing groups are rampant amidst an outburst of pain that is being expressed in truth. It is an interesting moment in history to study self-emptying power and the humility of God. In Eugene Peterson's translation of Philippians 2, he writes, God, having become human, stayed human. God lives and dies in God's creation. God abides in us. This is what we see through the crucified Christ. God cries out in the lungs of Eric Gardner, Javier Ambler, Manuel Ellis, Elijah McClain, and George Floyd, I can't breathe. God has made a home among us. In fact, both the Old and New Testament begin with a message about God's loving descent into the world. In chapter 2, I briefly identify creation as the first picture of kenosis in the Bible. The creation poem reveals an outflow of generosity, reflecting the nature of the divine spirit as a God who gives God's self. I like to think of creation as goodness overflowing, lovingly creating the substance for all that is. And God is in it, and it is all called good. Then comes the fall. I don't know why exactly, and I don't know how, but Christianity is not the only religion with a creation narrative that encounters a fall, a schism, a separation. The human experience has long been described in these terms. For me, this reality underlines Makrina's belief that we all come from love and will return to it. This is the collective longing of the human heart. We are being pulled by God, by love, by goodness, by beauty, as if by a rope. The more I study the God of the Christ hymn, the more I come to marvel at the mystery of this God, the self-emptying, self-giving, eternal fount of love. So the intent of this thesis has been to illumine an understanding of kenotic love, and to demonstrate how one's encounter with this love leads to personal transformation, resulting in a relationship of authentic, self-giving love with God, oneself, and others. My findings conclude that we can, with integrity, follow the path of Christ and engage the teachings of early church theologians to not only make the assertions I have made, but to insist on them. Humankind is made in the image of God and is a mirror reflecting that image. You are the image. Nothing can take the image away. In an album released in February of this year, Grace Semler Baldridge, aka Semler, calls out the injustices faced by queer people in the church, bellowing out, "But I'm a child of God, just in case you forgot, and you cast me out every single chance that you got, and that's your loss, not mine. I'll be better than fine. You just missed your shot to meet the unholy divine." It seems to me that Jesus was also called the unholy divine, as he claimed to be the Son of God. Jesus was hated for this. He was not recognized. He was cast out. Even so, mainstream evangelicalism marches on, neither seeing nor perceiving. In another strikingly kenotic song, Semler sings, "Oh, what a terrible honor it's been to learn that my blessings are things you call sins. I'll spend the rest of my life tearing down the Jesus from Texas you put in a crown, but I won't give up on you." She ends the album with an outro, sung in true gospel fashion, repeating these words. Well, I don't know who you think I am, but I belong in the promised land. I don't know who you think I am, but I'll be ready at the Father's hand. I may never know money, I'll never know fame, but I've wrestled too long to lose my name. Being fully herself, a preacher's kid, and a self-identified sad queer folk artist, Semler strikingly invokes the spirit of Christ. Of course she does. Jesus said, the thief comes to steal and kill and destroy. I have come that they may have life and have it to the full. This is the whole point. Christ has come that you might have life, your life. This is the only life you are meant to give. This is the Kenotic offering. That is it. Thank you. It's a lot of words.
I just want to say thank you for doing that with us today. I feel like you did exactly what you wrote about. Thank you.
So one of the interesting things for me is how you do such a deep dive into Kenotic Love and yet hold on to particularity. You know, like the Merton stuff, at least the part that you shared with us was through Merton, most of it. You know, about the individual and the unique value of that, and that fits with what you're saying about feminism part 2, in that Kenosis isn't about, it's about losing yourself without losing yourself somehow, you know, like that paradox of what you do is it trying to figure out where my question is. It's surprising to me how you do that. You do it effectively, but it's not the normal way that we hear those things. So how do we hold on to that paradox? You know, what helps you the most to do both and?
I'm so conflicted. Every time I talk about, I think Kenotic Love, I feel like I'm throwing in all of these disclaimers, and so maybe that's what you're saying that I'm doing that's a bit different, but I mean, I sometimes think, like when I think of self-giving, because it's not like I could contradict my own words so easily. Like I brought like a criticism to the word selflessness, but I could use the word selflessness in a positive way. So anyway, but I'm not answering your question. I'm just
it's okay.
entering it with you. Yeah.
I just had a thought or a quote there. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah.
It's Tim here.
Hi, Tim.
It was in regards, actually, I'd emailed you about mid-semester in regards to a quote from The Slavery of Death by Richard Beck. Just asking about the idea of kenosis or the letting go. And I loved your response here. I just wondered, I'll just read it here.
Aww.
You said, I like this quote a lot. I think it's an excellent point. We will not have the courage to let go of the false self-ego if we do not know that underneath it all, we are deeply loved.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that just speaks to the essence of being a beloved before you can really undergo or let go of that self.
Yeah.
So thank you for that quote too. I used it in my essay.
Oh, good. Well, thank you. Joel, did you?
Yeah, I really appreciate it. What you did today. I have a number of things running through my head. Yeah, kind of similar. I'm thinking about the giving of the self, and what I'm wondering, do we need to pop out into a quote unquote self on the other side? It's a question. I'm feeling like the sense of also the excess when the operation of love has no limit. You know, it's like this emptiness, but there's this excess, right? That doesn't stop. Yeah. And then I really love the way you, how do you say the name of the saint? I don't know.
Makrina.
Makrina. So Saint Makrina. I love the way you brought her, and there's icons, and the moment when you say that there's a, she, you know, they're not holding her, she's holding them, the guys, the typical lineage of knowledge producers, sanctified, registered knowledge producers, you know, she's holding them. And so it made me want to ask you, and in relation to Theosis too, where we're divinized, do you have a relation with Makrina, and what has that been like for you? Has it been through icon? Has it been other ways?
Brad, could you hear that question? Yeah. Brad has taught me that I have a relationship with Makrina, I think, because I wasn't well. It hasn't been a strong part of my tradition to connect spiritually with other people other than God. And so I think I've been learning about that and opening my heart to that in the mystical sense. You know, just last night, as I was laboring over this presentation, I got a short email from Ron Dart, who was my second reader, and he just said, "Thank you so much for the card." And then I'm not going to be able to quote him precisely, but
I could do it for you.
Oh, good.
I wanted to say this anyways as a greeting from Ron, but it honors you, so it's good for everyone to hear it. So Ron said this of Jessica: "Your interest in Makrina is Makrina in you being birthed. Do ever be the midwife of such a saint." Well, that raises more questions than it answers, but it certainly tells you about a connection, doesn't it?
Yeah. So I hope that brings something to engage with there. Yeah. Peter.
So I love this very much. Thank you very much for it. I love the Merton ideas too about, and I love I've just been reading Meister Eckhart, who talks all the time about God being born in everybody. So, and there's a big connection between the things that he says and the things that Thomas Merton say about the soul. But I love that you give new meaning or a better meaning to kenosis. To me, it seems as though, you know, we've, as you've outlined, we've given a false meaning to it. And so I thought, wouldn't it be wonderful if we could kenos all of the bad thinking? Kenos all the patriarchy, kenos all the dominance, kenos all the racism, kenos all of this stuff that is so marred our, you know, just as you so easily and beautifully said, this is what it often has meant in history, but this is what I think it really means, to draw the jewel of the true self out of the person. That the emptying that allows the fullness. Wouldn't it be beautiful if all of our horrible thinking could be emptied? Yeah, and put on the waste pile forever.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. I love that. And I, in my chapter on kenosis, I start with the poem by George Herbert that is from the bag, taken from the bag, and it gives an image of God undressing, or of Christ undressing. And that's an image that stayed with me, and it's what I think of in that way, it's like I'm using kenosis in both ways, like you just identified, but that God is, that sentence of God's taking off the false God. Like, I don't think think there were ever any robes to begin with, but God's taking off the robes we've placed on God. Yeah, and so all of the, I'm with you. Yes.
Yes,
yeah.
I'm trying to remember, Jess, if did you talk about, it's still so fresh, but I'm trying to remember if you talked about kenarchy, because you've pushed back at patriarchy here using kenosis, and now it seems like there are some modern scholars who've picked up on this, the archy or leadership, that is kenotic, so hence kenarchy. Did you go there at all, or what do you want to say to the folks?
No, I didn't. You're still teaching me. No, I didn't go there. That's interesting.
Well, you did. We just didn't use that word.
Right.
Like you did it very well. It's the kenosis provides an alternative to patriarchy, and I heard that all the way through. That's why I'm like,
right.
Maybe you use that term, but if we want to use a term for it, that is one that's become. It's fairly fresh, but it also needs all of the caveats you did give it. Like, so the books on kenarchy right now, half of them are like what it doesn't mean because of how, especially towards women who've been called to be less than their true selves. And I suppose that was one of my favorite parts of even the presentation today, was recognizing this is not about erasure in any way. Kenosis is not erasure. I'm thinking out loud in front of everyone. Sorry about that. You've stimulated my mind again. Thanks.
Good. Thank you. Lois?
Yeah, in that spirit of thinking out loud, I've got two comments or questions, and you can choose one or the other, or neither, or both. The first one, early on, you talked about, and I think, this is the first time I've ever heard the word kenosis, so forgive me if I'm making mistakes in understanding the meaning. But you talked about Jesus emptying himself of privilege.
Yeah.
But before you said privilege, I had auto-filled power.
Right.
So I'm just curious if there's a connection, or how you see the connection. Are they interchangeable terms, or are they different terms? So that's one, just probably very secondary to the overall meaning of your work. But the second one, I'm really fascinated by Makrina. I knew nothing of her coming into this, but I'm curious if you would, just a little bit that you talked about her and her relationship with her brothers, and the intriguing fact that they saw her, or at least were interpreting them as sort of in relationship to her, recognizing that she is teaching them, that she is holding them. Mm-hmm. Would you think of her as a 4th century feminist, or would you think, in today's context, would she be a feminist? And if she would, what wave of feminism would she be?
That's so good. Well, I think of all, like, the Cappadocian Fathers. I'm thinking out loud too. I think of them more as feminists than her. Mm-hmm. But that's only because I don't know how she would interpret the things that I'm saying. So I've thought about that a lot. And in my critical analysis, the first part is the challenge of distance, in which I lay it out that, like, perhaps Makrina would disagree with me, and in where I've taken like the trajectory I've followed with her thoughts. And so that's something I hold with open hands. I kind of say that I think that the things that we're agreeing on would hold us together. But that being that we come from love and return to love. But the Cappadocians really, I mean, they were feminists. They were really digging into the image of God resides in everyone, and it was not the popular opinion at the time. And so I didn't quote Tertullian, but I do quote him in my thesis, and the popular view at the time is awful to read or see. So yeah. And then about privilege and power, both and. I think it's like a different kind of power. It's a letting go of power, but then we find that like power is, I'm gonna be really, really religious. Power is Christ crucified. That like that's somehow where we see the power. So it's a completely different, yeah. Yeah, and again, so it's like you have to use those words in, like they have opposite meanings, but it's the same word. It's like a problem of language that I don't know much about. Yeah.
I think it stuck in my mind because privilege is such a politically laden word these days. I mean, so is power, of course, but yeah, I think it's intriguing because I sort of corrected myself and said, oh yeah, it is privilege that he could lay down. He couldn't lay down power in that sense and still be fully divine and fully human.
Yeah.
Privilege is a part that as humans we can maybe lay down, hopefully lay down. Yeah. Anyway, I'll puzzle further on that.
I like it. Okay. I think that's good. Thank you.
So great to have a full room, and so great to have so many people in the Zoom room. Thank you. And you've probably noticed we've had some pitch hitting for tech support here. Thank you very much to the Dean of Students and the Director of Program Innovation for helping out.
And Jay.
Thanks, Jess.
Yeah. Thank you, Jess.
Thank you. Enjoy your day.
Well done.
Thank you. I can come close to you now. Thank you guys for coming.